Now then, it's time to bring you perspective on the programme. And to most of us, we call a man, and if he's attracted to other men, he would be described as gay. We call a woman, and if she is attracted to other women, she would be described, of course, as a lesbian. Or if someone rejects the sex they've been assigned at birth, they are transsexual. But why? And if you come from a group of people who had, or perhaps still have, other ideas, why should the above be the norm? Well, with us today in Perspective is Harlan Pruden. He's a First Nations Cree academic and a Two-Spirit educator. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme today. I know you've stayed up very late to talk to us, so thanks very much. It's not just about how people are called and labelled, this, is it? It's about the whole way groups of people are seen, if you like.
It totally is.
And why is that? What are we getting wrong, do you think?
I want to share with you. Can you repeat yourself? I'm sorry.
I was saying, what are we getting wrong in labelling people in the way that we do then?
Well, first of all, I just have to explain that I am in Canada, I am First Nations, and I am Indigenous to this land. Prior to colonization, we had more than two genders. From my Cree Nation, we had 4 different genders. And although we engaged in same-sex sexual relations, we didn't have words that translated into gay, lesbian, or bisexuality. What the social convention was that you could not, these other genders, right? You couldn't have a sexual relations within your own gender. So I, as an Iyakwe, that's how we would say it in our word, I would have to have a sexual relations outside of my gender, and so I would have relationships with our straight identified men, what we would call straight. We actually don't have a word for straight either. And similarly, our female assigned Two-Spirit people would take straight women as wives. And so we don't have words like gay. And so labeling words and naming folks and thinking that just because you're having same-sex sexual relations, that would equate to someone being gay and or lesbian, is we don't, as Indigenous people, we didn't think of things like that.
So how does that, how do you talk about it then? Or was it just not talked about, if you like?
It was totally talked about. And, like we had our own words, and I've collected probably about 130 words and terms and ideas in our own languages that named and accounted and identified these other genders. Now, to conceive of genders, really quickly, like for me as my Cree people, basically are men hunted and our women gathered. Now, of course, there was many other roles than that. And also within the public sphere, a man or a nehiao was never allowed in a woman's camp or in a squea camp, and a woman was never allowed in a man's camp. And so if there was ever disharmony or discord amongst these two camps, a man couldn't walk over to the woman's camp to figure out what was going on, and a woman couldn't go over to a man's camp. But us as a Iyakwe, we had equal access to both of these camps, and so we could go back and forth and mediate, peace and harmony amongst these two camps, or balance. So it was our role within society. So our men hunted, our women gathered, and we mediated. A man couldn't do this, a woman couldn't do this, only us as a Iyakwe could do this. And so there are some nations that have like 12 different genders, and some nations had 4, 5, 6, 7 different genders. And with each gender, you had a different role within society. Men hunting, women gathering, us mediating, and it just goes on and on and on. And so we talked about it, and we were just valued, we were equally valued, and we were equally honored, as our warriors were honored or our women were honored. We were equally honored. And it was not something that we shied away from. I know that for us within the Cree community, we were incredibly pro-sex or sex positive.
But listening to that, though, I mean, it's obvious that the civilization. Sorry to interrupt, but just listening to that, I mean, obviously the civilization that you were used to had its norms as well. So what's wrong with having the norm of calling people gay or calling people lesbian?
Right. I think that for Western and colonial folks, if that's what they choose for that culture and for their own culture and for their own ways, by all means, say gay, say lesbian, say bi. But then for those colonizers to come over to this territory or to go into some other territory and to impose their labels, their ways of conceiving sex, sexuality, gender identity, and gender and expression, and imposing upon people, then we have an issue and we have a problem.
And it's not just in your own culture, is it? It's sorry to interrupt again. We've got a bit of a delay on the line. But I was just going to say that it's not just in your own culture, is it? I mean, I know that you've done research around the world on this as well.
True. You have the Hijra in India, the Mahu in Hawaii, the Fa'afafine in Samoa. And this gender plurality or like multiplicity exists in many indigenous communities across the world. And those, I would argue, and I'm not really dug into that because I've just been focusing here on Canadian and American indigenous people, that I don't know whether or not that they would have words that translates into gay or lesbian.
And just finally, I mean, listening to you here, it's obviously something that you feel very passionate about. Why was this what you were passionate about, rather than, I mean, we often have people who are very passionate about obviously standing up for people who are gay or lesbian and making sure that, their rights are respected as individuals. So why for you was it important that, your past culture, if you like, was what you decided to investigate, for want of a better word?
Sure. For one, it's not past. Two, it is my culture. And as an Indigenous person, I am Indigenous through and through. And that in absence of these words, these teachings, and this way of being that challenges and is a testament to our survival and resistance to colonization, in absence of these teachings, I thought that I had to make a choice between being gay identified and being Indigenous, or, I was not called nice names on my reservation, and I left and I moved to New York City, and I now live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And when I learned of these teachings of me being a Yahweh, it centered my ingenuity, me being First Nations Cree, and it also was a centering of my sexual desires and wants. And there was like this calling home. And so there's this like peace, And so for colonization, it also introduced homophobia and transphobia and pushed me from my culture, pushed me from my community and from my ways. And so these teachings and this knowledge is that pushes against this colonization makes me whole and made me commit to not only learning about this, but also organizing and working for the reclaiming and the restoration of our place of honor and respect for our Indigenous communities, our Indigenous peoples within their various communities.
Fascinating to talk to you.
And
Thanks
I think
ever so much for joining us. Sorry,
major...
we're going to have to interrupt you there because we've run out of time. But Harlan, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Harlan Pruden, First Nations Cree academic and Two-Spirit educator, joining us there from Vancouver, staying up very late to talk to us. So thanks to him for that.